William's coming
Recording
on.
in progress.
Hey, William, how you doing, man?
All right.
Some sort of alert.
How's everybody doing? All right.
We're just getting the technical bugs kicked out real quick. Yeah, I'm gonna turn the volume up here, William, real quick, so I can hear you.
All
right, William.
Yep, I'm right here.
Awesome, man. Good deal.
All right, sports fans. How's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. And this evening is a very special edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast, as I have the privilege to be joined by my good partners from the Small Market Podcast. Gentlemen, good evening to you. And how's everything going?
Fantastic. We're doing great, William. How are you doing, man?
I am doing tremendous. I hope your holiday was well. And, right now we're between the holidays and we've had Christmas and New Year's is next. And New Year's also means bowl games. And of course, right now there are a couple of important bowl games that people are talking about. There's a couple of important bowl games that the three of us are looking at. And I know we're ready to dive into them tonight. And when I say important bowl games, I'm talking about none other than the college football playoff. It's a very interesting quartet of teams that have made the field of four this year. It's a real motley crew. You got two from the SEC that were expected to get there. You have one from the Big Ten that was not expected to be there. And then you have one from a group of five that darn sure wasn't expected to be there. So let's start off with, we got Alabama and Cincinnati going at it in the first semifinal game. And to me, I think it's such a contrast because there are those people who are going to say, well, you know what, Cincinnati just got thrown to the wolves and having to face Alabama. I really don't think so. I mean, Cincinnati deserves to be here. They ran the table on their schedule. They beat some solid teams out there. And I think people are overlooking that. They beat a very good Notre Dame team. And you look at Notre Dame right now, had they not beaten Cincinnati, they might be in the college football playoff. They beat a good Houston team to win the American Athletic Conference. And then, of course, they also beat a solid SMU team. And we saw how good SMU was because they just lost their head coach, Sonny Dykes, to TCU. So what do you think that the keys are for Cincinnati to go in there and pull this upset off against Alabama as their big time underdogs?
Well, on defense, William, I see that you have to get after Bryce Young. In all the games that came to within 7 points, Alabama lost one, but they won the other three. They gave up about 4.7 sacks per game. So you have to be able to get to the quarterback. You're going to have to put a seventh guy in the box. And I think if you're Cincinnati, you can do that because on the back end, you have two NFL caliber quarterbacks in Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant, who they're third in interceptions in all college football, Cincinnati is, and they only gave up like 168 passing yards per game, which was number one. So you can afford to put another guy in the box to load up and try and get to the quarterback and stop the run. That's what you need to do on defense. Now, on offense, that's where it's going to be a little bit tough because you might be able to hold Alabama to maybe around 20, 23 points if you play a great game on defense. But you got to be able to put up numbers on offense. And you got a good running back. Yeah, it's an Alabama transfer in Jerome Ford. And you have, Desmond Ridder, who is like 43-5 over his career and stuff. He's good, but I don't know that you have enough playmakers necessarily on offense. And so that'll be kind of the key to see what you can do there in order to be able to beat Bama. I mean, it's going to be tough sledding no matter what you do.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it and I'm looking at this game first and foremost for me. I think Des Ridder has to play the best game of his life. I mean, flawless, no mistakes, they have to get into a rhythm. They have to dictate the pace, and I think it's going to start with their running ability, with Ford. But who knows more about Ford as a running back besides Luke Fickle, and that's going to be Nick Saban because, of course, he got recruited to Alabama. But it just shows you the depth of the talent at each position where this guy transferred from Alabama, went to Cincinnati, and of course Alabama's offense didn't skip a beat, but now this guy has had an opportunity to showcase himself. But yeah, to your point, they got to dictate the pace. For me, I think Alabama, they cleared that hurdle. That's the biggest thing for me because you look at Bama coming down the stretch, and some people are going to harp on the fact that, well, they weren't playing well, this, that, and the third. You throw out the rule book in the rivalry games. You look at LSU. I mean, Ed Orgeron was a lame duck coach going into that game. He already knew his fate. And to me, it was one of those where LSU was playing on house money because you looked at that game, they were going fake punts, onside kicks. It was kind of like, they were throwing everything at Alabama except the kitchen sink. Arkansas, they made tremendous strides this year, and they gave Alabama a run for their money. And then, of course, the Auburn game. You throw the rule books out of the window because Auburn, they weren't even close to being as good as Alabama this year, but that's the Iron Bowl. Anything can happen there. We've seen it over the years. But then once Alabama got to the SEC championship game, of course, it was game on. So I think the biggest thing for Cincinnati in this game, they have to avoid that wave because Alabama, they can bring that wave, no pun intended, to the tide. But it's one of those where, you know what, they can start the game with a big time play, get a quick touchdown. Next, 7-0. Their fan base is into it. Now Cincinnati tries to respond, and they get stopped, and then Bama gets the ball back. They can get a touchdown. It's 14-0, and before you know it, the floodgates are about to open up. So I think that's what some people are expecting of Cincinnati. Me personally, I think Luke Fickell will have his team ready to play on the 31st. Will it be enough against Alabama? That's going to be a different story, though.
I agree with you. I think that it's going to be tough sledding for Cincinnati on offense, but I believe Luke Fickell's defense will be able to stem that wave that you're talking about, where he won't let it get out of control. You won't look up and all of a sudden it goes from 3-0 or 7-0 to 20, 21, 24-0. You know what I'm saying? Which will give his offense a chance. But it's going to be how that offense plays for Cincinnati that I think will determine how this game will go.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking at it, we saw a different element that was added for Bryce Young during the SEC championship game. Bryce Young, the scrambler. And of course, he didn't run around sort of like just rack up yards. He's running around to buy, time for his receivers to get open. But nonetheless, that's going to be something for Fickell and the Cincinnati coaching staff. That's another wrinkle for them to think about in this game. But I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to Alabama, and you look at the successful coaches over the generations, for once upon a time it was Joe Paterno, we saw it with Pete Carroll at USC, and now we see it with Nick Saban. When you give these guys extra time to game plan for an opponent going into a bowl game, they really get an opportunity to really just peel the skin back and just really dissect what you cannot do, and they know how to expose it. Nick Saban is probably one of, if not the best coaches in college football right now at doing that. We saw what he did to Notre Dame last year in the semifinal game. We've seen him do it so often in the semifinals, and I know that there are going to be some people that want to harp on the fact that John Mechie was lost with the knee injury, but we saw Jamison Williams step up, and I mean Alabama has a top recruiting class every year, so now they've had several weeks to bring some of those other guys up to speed, and we haven't even talked about their running backs yet. That's going to be the other thing for this for the Cincinnati defense to do. And you look at their best player, Joel DeBlanco, in that front seven. I think Alabama finds a way to neutralize him because he is very important. You talked about their secondary, but I think DeBlanco is so important to what they can do defensively. So if if Cincinnati's going to go out there and win this thing, it's going to have to be an ugly game. And if it's an ugly game, I think the Blanco definitely has a part in doing so.
I think you're right. I think for Alabama, Brian Anderson's got to get involved early and often. When he gets the ball on first down, they're averaging 6 yards per carry. And if you put Cincinnati's defense in a position where it's 2nd and 4, they're going to have a long night. Plus, I mean, he's got like 32 catches out of the backfield. So if you're not handing it off to him, pass it out to him on the flat. I mean, get him involved early, especially with John Menchie being out. Jameson is going to need some help. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna have to take some of that weight off him. You can't just be pitching it around, especially against a secondary like that.
Definitely. What are you guys' thoughts? Because I have a theory, and I want to get the opinion from both of you on this one. You look at a guy like Will Anderson for Alabama, had a phenomenal year defensively. Yeah. He did not get the invite to New York for the Heisman Trophy presentation. I guarantee you that Alabama coaching staff and Nick Saban is coaching him up on that. And I think he can be an X factor in this game because we know what Alabama can do under Saban in these situations. He's the Belichick of the college game. And, he can cook up a defensive plan that, Desmond Ridder, who is a seasoned vet in regards to college football quarterbacks, has not seen. And I mean, Desmond Ridder, of course, he's been there so long. I think he was with Cincinnati when they were still in the Big East. So, I mean, that lets you know how long he's been there. But nonetheless, I think a guy like Will Anderson could have a big impact in this game for the Tide.
Yeah, we were just talking about Will Anderson before the show, actually, because we were watching a press conference on him, and he was intense. He was
chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, he was almost comedically intense. He was so hyped up, and he was talking about how they've been disrespected all year and all this stuff. And Wataki even said to me, he was like, oh, who's walking around disrespecting Alabama? Nobody disrespects Alabama. Even if you hate Alabama, you still respect them. And but I absolutely think Nick Saban is coaching him up and trying to get him hyped up and hey, did you hear what they said about him? Did you hear what they said about us? And blah blah blah. And my thought was, yeah, he definitely should have gotten invited to the Heisman banquet. But my theory is that and Wataki and I were talking about this before the show too. It's not what it used to be. I mean, back when we were kids, even the Heisman was something really, really to be coveted and took seriously. Now it's a little bit more politics as usual, and that's a guy that missed an invite there, and he probably should have been invited over Aiden Hutchinson. And it's a shame that he wasn't. My theory is that they didn't want to invite two people from the same team with both Bryce Young and himself. It would just look like, oh, well, now it's obvious that we favor Alabama, or that people want to see as much of Alabama as they possibly can.
But the numbers don't lie.
The numbers don't lie. Yeah, the kid should have gotten an invite, and it's a shame that he didn't. But yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I look at it. I think he definitely deserved the invite. I think, in my opinion, like what you're saying is partially true, because you have to figure it's once in a while where we see teammates, as a finalist. One that definitely comes to mind right off the top of my head was back in 2006 when Matt Leinart had won. 2005. I take that back. When Matt Leinart had won the Heisman Trophy the year before for USC. And then, Reggie Bush just had that phenomenal season in 2005. So, of course, Leinart, any other year, Leinart would have won back-to-back Heismans, but it was really hard to, underscore what Reggie Bush did that year. And I was in the category that, Reggie should have never lost his Heisman. That's a whole different topic for a whole nother podcast. But nonetheless, it's one of those, just maybe possibly thinking, that Aiden Hutchinson being the upperclassman, and I mean not to take anything away from him because he had a phenomenal season at Michigan. Maybe that's the reason for it. Maybe like you said, they didn't want to have two guys from Alabama there and have an Alabama overload. I don't know. But definitely he did deserve the nod to come to New York for the presentation. I mean, it's an honor just to get there. I mean, because we've seen most years where there's a clear-cut winner, and then the other three guys is kind of like, okay, you get a free trip to New York, so you might as well go. But for me, it could be a little, more of that defensive bias as well, because it's just like the NFL MVP award. Typically it's going to go to the quarterbacks. I mean, for you as a running back to, even be considered for the award, you have to, get 2,000 yards on the ground. I mean, and then, in college, it's like, I mean, we've seen some great defensive players, but in all of those years, only Charles Woodson, won the award, but it wasn't just because of what he did on defense. He came up with some big plays at receiver for Michigan in the Penn State game that year, and then of course in the Ohio State game, and then of course returning kicks as well. So it's hard to, take away from a guy like that. But it's so difficult, unfortunately, when you don't have the ball in your hands on plays, and that and like people are always going to gravitate to the guy who has the ball in his hands. I don't personally agree with it, because if you're talking about the best athlete on the field, the guy who is the best player, and I know there's so many different positions in football that it's tough to like compare positions. Yeah. But a guy like Will Anderson was so important to that defense this year, especially being that Alabama lost so many players from that defense last year, and they're still right back in the same spot that they were a year ago. But that's a tribute to Nick Saban, because we've seen this over and over and over again, where Alabama, has about 5 or 6 guys in the first round, and then by the time you get to the 4th or 5th round, they've already had like 12 guys taken in the draft. So it's one of those where, of course, when he goes to recruit these young men when they're in high school, it's hard for one of them to say no, because listen, if they want to get to the pro level, he knows what it takes to get them there, and he has a track record. The Heisman Trophy winners, the SEC championships, the national championships. It's one of those where when you go to Alabama, you know that you're going to win, and you're going to be on TV a lot, and you're going to, like, people household wise across this country are going to be talking about you, and because they know you. So nonetheless, with Will Anderson, I think it's a situation for him. He's going to have some extra motivation on his back, because he wants to go out there and show why he should have been invited to New York City. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me, like jokingly maybe, that he kind of nudges Bryce Young maybe at practice one day and like, hey, you know what? How's my Heisman? But I mean, it would probably just be like some good old fashioned ribbing. Don't get me wrong, but nonetheless, it's one of those where, he can use that as motivation for him.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Getting back to that respect thing a little bit, William. Bryce Young has said that Texas A&M loss is a defining moment in the season for them. It's one loss, and to me, I guess we come from a rough pro football state with the Lions and stuff. We've suffered many losses, and it feels like a stretch, or it feels hard for me to think like that one loss, you can take that and that can motivate your whole season to then rattle off 12 wins and stuff. But I mean, that goes back to that whole respect thing. Like their whole school is just based off of respect, and just thrives off of it. Where, like, do you hear anybody in the media or anybody like near you not giving Alabama the respect they deserve?
Well, no, I mean, because it's one of those where they get the respect that they deserve. Um, as far as I'm concerned, from the people who I listen to, and
Yeah.
of course myself. But the thing was, Alabama, I had them as number one coming into the season because they lost. I take that back. I had them. I want to say I had them like number three, maybe four, just due to the fact of, Bryce Young hadn't played quarterback yet for them, consistently, but everything else was in place. But people were talking about him like, hey, listen, this kid is the truth. It's one of those for me that, they lost so much from last year's team. And people expected them to like slide off. But I'm like, wait a minute, this is Alabama. And to me, I think this was a prototypical season. This current season is a prototypical season of what we've seen from Alabama in recent years. They played some close ones early on. They blew out Miami in their first game down at the I was about to say Georgia Dome, but the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But the thing was, they had a close one with Florida. That was before we found out that Florida was going to go off the cliff because they weren't going to be that good. But then, I think that that Texas A&M game kind of woke them up because you notice Alabama usually has that one hiccup, and it's even Nick Saban said it prior to the Texas A&M game. These guys are believing their own press clippings, listening to the hype too much, and it's one of those where, okay, you lost. So when they come back in that locker room, when they come back onto that practice field after the loss, now it's going to be like, okay, now I have your attention now. And then I think for these guys as well, he in talking about the tough loss, there's a culture there in that locker room where what, and it's the right culture where guys hate to lose more than they enjoy winning. And you need guys like that on your team if you're going to win. So it's one of those, I think those guys understood, listen, after that A&M loss, we can't lose any more games. It's got to be game on right now. And they took that moniker. And I think, character is built throughout the year because when you're in adverse situations, you find out who you are. The offense was there in the A&M game. It was the defense that, had the issues. But nonetheless, they came back, they persevered. I think for me, their ultimate gut check was the Iron Bowl versus Alabama. Pardon me, versus Auburn. And then, of course, in the SEC championship game, once they got a feel of Georgia and what they could and couldn't do, it was game on. So, I think this team is battle tested, and I think they're ready to make, obviously they're making a run, but make a legitimate run at another national championship for Nick Saban.
I agree.
So I want to ask you guys, who do you like in this game between Cincinnati and Alabama overall?
Well, I like Alabama.
Yeah,
I want to see Cincinnati.
Yeah,
but I can't commit to it.
Yeah, I think Alabama. Nick Saban always finds a way.
I think they're just too deep. There's too much talent, and Nick Saban is just it's a factory down there. Like, this is just what he does. I don't think Luke Fickell worries him one bit. Now he'll never admit that, but I think the best Cincinnati is going to be able to do is keep it close. But I think in the end, Alabama's going to prevail.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think Cincinnati's going to give it a game effort, but I'm going to take Alabama by 20 in this game. I'm going to take Alabama 37-17 because it's one of those where I think Cincinnati is going to be so juiced up for this game, and not in a bad way. They're going to go out there and they're going to try to like make the plays and compete. But it's one of those where if you put Desmond Ridder in a third and long situation or second and long situation, and they can't run the football, and now Will Anderson and To'o have that opportunity to pin their ears back and come after, Desmond Ridder. Alabama has more pass rushers than Cincinnati has good offensive linemen. So I look at it right there. I think that is a key right there. Cincinnati's defense will try to get after Bryce Young, but the speed of wide receiver is going to be too much for the Bearcats.
I think you're right. Alabama by at least 20. And Nick Saban he's been there too many times, and he knows how to play that game.
Now, of course, the one that you two gentlemen are very, very interested in, and a lot of people in your neck of the woods are interested in as well, is of course the showdown in Miami in the Orange Bowl between Michigan and Georgia. And for me, I think there is so much intrigue coming into this game. First and foremost, I am shocked that Georgia is such a big favorite over Michigan heading into this game because I did a little research on this, like I always do. And in the BCS era and in the college football era, no team, with the exception of Alabama, has lost their last game and come back and won it all. They've actually all lost in their next game. I think I go back. I think it was 2003, one year that definitely comes to mind for me. If you guys remember when Oklahoma got blown out by K State in the Big 12 championship game, and then they ended up facing LSU in the Sugar Bowl for the national title, and then they got destroyed. I also think back to 2001 when Nebraska got blown out in their last game of the regular season against Colorado. They didn't even win the Big 12 North, and they still got selected to go play Miami in the Rose Bowl. And of course, you know, the rest is history. So, I mean, I'm looking at this Georgia team. I know that a lot of people, you know, want to talk about their defense getting back on track. But to me, I first and foremost, I think Georgia got exposed in the SEC championship game.
Yeah.
I think they did. I think on the offensive side of let me preference this. Earlier in the year, at the start of the season, if you would have told me that Michigan's going to be playing Georgia in the Orange Bowl in the CFP, I'd have been like, we're going to get our doors blown off. But I've become a believer in Michigan. And then I started looking at Georgia. And Georgia on the offensive side of the ball is a lot like Michigan when Harbaugh first got there. They want to run the ball. They want to run the rock. They got 5 guys that got 45 carries or more. They got 2 tight ends, Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers, and they're elite tight ends, and they use them a ton. And they got George Pickens, who'll be playing on Sundays, and that's kind of their deep threat to stretch the field, but they really work those tight ends, and that is so Jim Harbaugh. The problem for Georgia with that is you will never beat Jim Harbaugh at Jim Harbaugh's game. You might be, Ohio State whooped them for many years, but they don't play like he does. But you're not going to come in and play the same style of offense as a Michigan used to do, prior to maybe this year, till Josh Gaddis got there, and beat them doing that. You know what I'm saying? There's a ton of similarities between Georgia and Michigan, and I don't think it's going to be a very lopsided game. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think this will be something that Michigan can definitely pull off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it. For me, Georgia has an elite defense. You can't, take that away from them. But honestly, if you look at their regular season slate, and I actually said this on my podcast leading up to the SEC championship game, I'm like, offensively, this Georgia defense hadn't been tested because I know that they got props for beating Clemson in the season opener. And I mean, granted, Clemson, they went 9-3 and they got a chance to go 10-3 if they beat Iowa State in their bowl game. And it definitely was a down year for Clemson. But, Clemson is not good offensively. You know what I'm saying? And we saw that as the season progressed. And honestly, the only touchdown that Georgia scored in that game was on a pick 6. So, it lets you know where they're at on offense. I think Georgia benefited from playing in the SEC East, because the SEC East does not stack up division wise against the SEC West. So, Georgia definitely had that going in their favor. And to their credit, they dominated. Now, I think this matchup definitely benefits Georgia in the in the semis in the sense that, like you said, similar styles. Michigan's a very physical blue collar team. They're not going to try to air it out like Alabama. And, we talked about like Will Anderson from Alabama, having a chip on his shoulder. I think this Georgia defense is going to have a chip on their shoulder overall because they got embarrassed in that SEC championship game by Alabama in their own backyard. And it's kind of like that same old sad song where, typical Georgia, they do whatever they have to do. But then once they get to Alabama, they find a way to, to not get it done. So I think that they're going to have a chip on their shoulders from that aspect. But the thing is, this is a different Michigan team for me. I think it has a different feel to me. I'm not saying that Michigan is going to win the national championship, but it kind of has that 97 feel where, you know what, they started off, they flew under the radar. Nobody paid any attention to Michigan that year until Separation Saturday when they went to Happy Valley and Penn State, who was ranked number 2 at that time, and they beat the brakes off of them. And then the next thing you know, of course, the Ohio State game, Rose Bowl, the rest is history. This year, it was one of those where, Michigan was undefeated. And I think they did pick up some big wins because you look at it, going to Camp Randall is never an easy place to win for any opponent in the Big Ten. And, Harbaugh, there, since he's been the head coach at Michigan, he has struggled there. That was a big win for Michigan. I also think, that it kind of hurt them, but helped them at the same time was a Michigan State loss, because at first the way the offense came out, you were like, oh wow, Michigan is looking like they're ready to run the table here this year. And then of course the second half was totally different. But to Harbaugh's credit, they did rally. And even though Penn State racked up some losses this year, that's still a tough place to go and win. And to come from behind like that, I think Michigan, got some character and like just really built up their confidence. And then I really think that after they were able to beat Ohio State in the fashion that they did, they probably just gotten so much confidence after that, because we saw what they did to Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. And I think for them to come in as a 7.5-point underdog like this, Harbaugh is going to have these guys really coached up.
Oh, I believe so. He's going to have them with a chip on their shoulder. And it'll be interesting, the matchup, Georgia's defensive line versus Michigan's defensive line. Michigan's defensive line offensive line, awarded top offensive line in the country. That's going to be a really, really good matchup. And going back to the wave thing that you were talking about with Cincinnati and Alabama, in games, the difference in this Michigan team is when they get punched in the mouth, they're not catching another couple punches. They're punching back this year. And that's something I haven't seen from a Harbaugh team in his tenure, not to this level. There's never a point where I'm like, well, when Ohio State went down and scored, I wasn't like, oh, here we go. Michigan came right back with a drive of their own. They can handle adversity better than any team that Harbaugh has had so far. So I don't, and they're so similar to Georgia, unless the talent level really is that there's that much of a difference of a talent level between the SEC and the Big Ten, which I don't think there is. I mean, there is slightly, but I don't think there is outside of like Alabama. I can see this being a close game, and I can definitely see Michigan pulling out the win here.
I think it's going to be a very close game because, number one, I think both of these teams have something to prove because, Georgia's been there all year long. People expected Georgia to be in this situation. And then I think for Michigan, because I look at it like this, Harbaugh has exercised a lot of demons this year. The only thing that he didn't do was beat Ohio State. I mean, pardon me, not Ohio State, Michigan State. But other than that, I'm like, Harbaugh has exercised a lot of demons this year because he did a lot of things that people said that he couldn't do for a program. I think this game right here is going to be tight throughout. I think it's going to be important for both of these teams to not get behind by more than 10 points, just due to the fact that their offenses, don't have the capability to consistently get down the field and score like that. I will give Michigan the slight advantage on offense over Georgia. Cade McNamara, number one, I think he's a better playmaker at quarterback than Stetson Bennett is. But I do think that both of these teams want to avoid being in third and long and second and long situations, because you look at those, what Georgia has in the front seven with their speed, that it's immense. But then Michigan with those edge rushers, just like Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabu, who do you stop? So I think it's what Georgia's going to have to do they're going to have to, rely on draw plays and running. I'm not necessarily screen plays because Aiden Hutchinson is so athletic that he can just move around and he can just disrupt the flow of what Georgia's trying to do in their passing game. Michigan offensively, they're going to have a couple of shots in this game. And it's one of those where when you get those shots, because you don't get so many in a game to make a big play, you've got to go out there and execute. So I think that's going to be on McNamara because this Georgia defense, they're going to try to neutralize both Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins. Easier said than done. So I think the onus offensively is going to be on McNamara in this game.
I think it'll come down to execution. Like you said, you're only going to get so many shots, and you got to capitalize on them. I think that with both these teams having staunch defenses and offenses that maybe not be explosive as like an Alabama, you're going to have to rely on special teams a lot. And I'm going to give Michigan the advantage in that with Brad Robbins, great punter, and Jake Moody. I mean, you're going to play that field position game.
Oh, definitely.
And when you get to that point, that being said, though, on the other side, you got to watch out for a guy like Kenny McIntosh for Georgia, who has the ability, hasn't done it this year, but he's a speedster, he's a burner, and he has the ability to take it to the house at any point in time. So if you're playing the field position game, you're kicking it away from him. But I give that advantage to Michigan. I think that if you watch, there's going to be probably at least 2 plays in this game that are going to be on special teams that are going to have huge momentum impacts.
Oh, listen, definitely. I totally agree. I mean, this one of those games that, field position, special teams, like you said, and on top of that, turnovers. Who can protect the ball? And I think the key to protecting the ball is to keep your quarterback out of second and third and long. Because if you're going to consistently ask Stetson Bennett to do what he had to do against Alabama, second and long, third and long situations, you saw that he wasn't that guy. So, and now you look at it, he had to deal with Will Anderson and company in the SEC championship game. Now you're like, hey, you know what? The better the teams, the better the pass rushers typically. So now you go from having to deal with Will Anderson and company. Now you're going to have to deal with David Ajabu and Aiden Hutchinson. And it's so much more difficult when you have multiple pass rushers that you have to account for, because a good defensive coordinator is going to always, shift his guys around. And in doing so, it's going to open up opportunities for, other players. I think back very quickly to Super Bowl 42, the first time that the Giants played the Patriots. The Giants that year had the ability to have multiple defensive ends on the field at the same time that were quality pass rushers. And sometimes they had 4 of them, and they put like guys like Justin Tuck at, defensive tackle. He was too quick for interior linemen. And of course, the rest is history. Michigan is in a similar situation with Ojabu and Hutchinson. You can line them up together. You can, have them as bookends, and then you can't double both of them, because if you end up doubling both of them, you're taking away from who's going out, in the pass route. And then on top of that, somebody else is going to run free. So it's one of those where, hey, pick your poison, because I'm really, the matchup as far as Georgia's wide receivers going up against Michigan's secondary, I think that is advantage Wolverines. But the Georgia tight ends in this game, I think they're going to be big versus this Michigan defense, because can they keep the Michigan linebackers honest? That's going to be important for me in this game. But I also want to see which team is going to be able to establish the line of scrimmage first. That is going to be so important. This is a game right here where there is little margin for error. Whereas Alabama can, make a mistake against Cincinnati, and I think they can avoid it. Cincinnati hasn't played a perfect game. I think both Michigan and Georgia, they have little margin of error. For example, let's say Georgia forces a turnover versus Michigan and gets the ball back. Okay, Michigan, however, has the defense to go out there and say, you know what, we can counter what you just did. So it's one of those where I think this is going to be kind of like one of those heavyweight boxing matches. I think we're going to see Michigan and Georgia try to feel out each other for the first half of the first quarter. and they're going to try to establish some things. And then at some point before the first half ends, we're going to see the kid gloves come off from both of these teams. So it's one of those where, to me, if you are a fan of old school football, and I'm talking about the days of Bo Schembechler, I'm talking about the days of Woody Hayes, Joe Paterno, Bobby Bowden, and so many other coaches, when it's physicality in the trenches, you know what? I think that this is a game for you, because I think it's going to be a very physical game. You have a lot of first rounders out there on both sides for this contest, and I think it's going to live up to its billing and then some. But to me, I'm just surprised that Michigan is such a big underdog against Georgia in this game. Not surprised about the spread between Cincinnati and Alabama, but more the Michigan-Georgia spread. I was thinking maybe the odds makers would have given Georgia 2.5, 3 points. Okay, fine. 7.5. I think that's reaching a little bit.
I can see why they do it, whether it's right or wrong. I can see why they do it. I mean, being a Michigan fan my whole life, you look at it and I'm just like, when does the other shoe drop? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm waiting like for 5 years. It was like every time there was a big game, Harbaugh's guys never showed up. Do you know what I mean? It never worked out. And this year it has. So it's like, you know what I mean? So maybe that's why the odds makers are just like, okay, are they really for real? Where Georgia's got a track record of being here. You know what I'm saying? As Michigan does not. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, that definitely is part of it. I think also the fact that, Georgia was number one for most of the year and they were so dominant for most of the year. But again, for me, I just think that, they got exposed a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a lot of it, in that SEC championship game against Alabama. And again, I'll ask anybody, go back and watch Georgia's games. Go back and watch who they played. I mean, they did blow out Arkansas at home, and Arkansas was a very improved team this year. They went down, they took care of business versus Clemson. And again, like I said before, Clemson's offense just was not that good this year. Florida underachieved. South Carolina wasn't good. Tennessee was an improving team, but Tennessee they're not ready, at least this year, to compete for the SEC title. So, you just go back and look at Georgia's record. I mean, they went on the road, they blew out Auburn. But the thing is, Auburn, they were 6-6 this year. So it's not like, we were talking about Auburn being world beaters. No. So I just asked people, listen, go back and look at who Georgia played. And the thing was, they never got tested. And on top of that, by the fourth quarter, their main guys on defense, for the most part, they were out of the games. And we saw how Georgia struggled with the tempo versus Alabama, because you could see some of the big guys on that line. They were running out of gas. They were puffing for air, because they hadn't dealt with the tempo, and they were on the field much more than they had been for the entire year. So I think that is something that we have to look at going into this game as well. And I can't harp on it as much that much, what I'm saying? But I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's the respect factor. And I think that some people, they're just anticipating a Georgia Alabama rematch. And for other people, they're going to look at it and say, it's SEC overload. I mean, don't get me wrong. Georgia and Alabama deserve to be here because they are two of the better teams in the country. I just think people should pump the brakes on just going out there and penciling in a Georgia Alabama rematch for the national title. I think people are anticipating what we saw a few years ago when these two teams met in Atlanta for the title. And I think if obviously different rosters, of course, from then to now, but that was a perfect storm because Georgia had their run game. And then, Oklahoma in that Rose Bowl had their passing attack. But then, of course, Georgia was able to make the adjustments defensively. And then, of course, the rest is history. A lot of things have to, factor in for, things like that to go down. That Clemson was the number one team that year, and they weren't that good offensively. Alabama exposed them. with Kelly Bryant as their quarterback. And of course, the rest was history. This time around, things are a little bit different. And I think that, you know, Michigan, for me, they've like, I can't say that they've flown under the radar, but to your point, a lot of people always consistently say, you know what, when is the other shoe going to drop? And it just hasn't. And you know what? At this point, maybe people need to sit back and say, hey, you know what? This isn't a typical Jim Harbaugh team that we saw at Michigan. Because for me, he does better when the expectations aren't that high. Because you go back to his first season at Michigan, nobody knew what Harbaugh was going to do. They expected him to, you know, make Michigan better than what they had been. But, you know, he went out there and they got 10 wins that season and they won a bowl game. So people in Ann Arbor, I'm sure they were thrilled by that. But, you know, when you go into the season ranked in the top 10 and you're trying to keep up with Ohio State, and then you see what Ohio State does, and then you get to the final game of the season, and then there's so much heartbreak, so much disappointment. It's kind of like, okay, here we go again. And for me, when I did my picks for the final weekend of the regular season in college football, in my heart, I really wanted to pick Michigan. I really did. But I said, you know what? In these moments, Harbaugh always finds a way to slip up, and Ohio State always capitalizes. And of course, the odds makers, just like it is with Georgia, they understood that too. But then, of course, things were different. And then you figured, okay, are they going to have anything left for the Big Ten title game after they just extended so much against Ohio State? And of course, we saw them just destroy uh, Iowa in the Big Ten title game. It's one of those where if this game were a week after the Big Ten title game, I think Michigan should have been favorites at that point because they had so much momentum. I think the only thing you have to worry about is, did their momentum get squashed a little bit between Big Ten title game and by the time they take the field at the end of the week. So we're gonna see real quickly how that works out.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where the focus is.
So what are your picks for this game?
I got Michigan by a field goal.
I'm thinking Georgia.
I'm gonna go Michigan. I'm gonna go Michigan 24-20. And I think I'm leaning on all of the factors that I told you about: field position, special teams, and it's gonna be which quarterback makes the mistake and which quarterback makes enough big plays, because I think both of these defenses are going to try to take away the run games. And I think if Michigan can put Cade McNamara in enough situations where he can make some plays, that's going to allow them to get back to that run game. And if they can get Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum going, and let's say together they can combine for at least 130 yards on the ground, I think that's advantage Michigan. I really think that, you know, Harbaugh is going to have this team ready off of the fact that, you know what, they're 7.5-point dogs. I looked at that right off the bat. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I think he's going to coach him up. The Orange Bowl, for me, I think it's going to be 50-50 because, you know, Georgia travels well. And, you know, the Michigan fan base, we talked about this with the Big Ten title game, chomping at the bit to finally get there. The Michigan fans are going to flood Miami like this was a Rose Bowl. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I'm sure the people down there at South Beach, they're probably going to get tired of hearing "Hail to the Victors" this week. But you know what? That's the way. That's the way it is, man.
I agree with you 100%. I think. I think there's going to be a ton of Georgia people just because of the proximity,
Right.
to Florida. But
Right.
like you said, Michigan fan base always travels well. This is the biggest game they've had since at least '97. The Rose Bowl in '97. So yeah, I think there's going to be a large maize and blue representation down there. So,
Oh, listen, definitely. I'm looking forward to both of these games. I'm also, looking forward to a couple of other bowl games, coming down the pike. Of course, unfortunately, we've seen a couple of games, have to be canceled, due to COVID reasons, and that's to be expected. But nonetheless, I'm definitely looking forward to these. Gentlemen, As always, it was a pleasure. And I want to give you this opportunity to let the people know who you are and what you do and where they can find you.
You can find us. We are all over the internet. First and foremost, probably on Spotify. That's the Small Market Podcast. And we are just a small little operation out of Midland, Michigan, the Great Lakes Bay region. We're about, what, an hour and a half away, 2 hours away from Detroit. So, yeah, we've suffered enough. As much as I'd like to see Michigan win, like I said, I think it's going to be Georgia, but I'd love to see. I know better as a Michigan fan not to get my hopes up. So but no, you can find us on Spotify and all
major platforms.
All platforms that podcasts are found on. We've got a YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. We're everywhere. So
what's your YouTube address so people can find you?
It is just at Small Market Podcast right now. So yeah, that's and our YouTube really isn't as big as yours is right now. You post on there constantly, and you got a lot of nice, like, short, kind of digestible videos, which is great. We always kind of struggle with that. We get our audio in, but and we focus a lot on guests. We have a lot of really great guests on. We've got a couple lined up so far. So we're looking forward to having them on in the new year coming up. But no, I mean, we were just talking about your YouTube channel and how great it is. But we're all over the place. Just
search Small Market Podcast.
Small Market Podcast. Yep. And look for the blue and orange. That's our logo right there, right here on the t-shirt.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, total. We're shameless promoters, man.
Hey, listen, that's what it's all about.
That's great, man. Thanks again for having us on, William.
Listen, it was a tremendous pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and we definitely need to do this again soon. Potentially, come back and talk about this just prior to the national championship game, and let's see, who survived, these two bowl games, and let's see who's gonna, get it on for the national title.
Right. I hope I'm wrong, man. Yeah. Let's see.
So, folks, that is going to wrap it up for this evening. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. If you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. If you're on Twitter, you can follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And we also have our Facebook page at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So for my good friends at the Small Market Podcast, this is William Martin signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.